We are delighted that Dr. Ramachandran is here and just testing. Hey, good evening. Happy New Year. Good evening. Happy New Year. We are delighted that all of you are here. This is a special lecture of the Varahmihira Science Forum. I'll give a brief introduction to Varahmihira Science Forum and to the speaker today who needs no introduction whatsoever. And then after that, we will get into the lecture. Varahmihira Science Forum was started about a year and a half back. We've had about 70 lectures. Happens every last Saturday at 4 p.m. So we actually have one coming up this Saturday, which is Republic Day, and Badri Sheshadri here will be the speaker for the next regularly scheduled lecture. We'll be talking about the structure of the ribosome, which is the title of the book and the subject matter of the research of Venki Ramakrishnan, the most recent Indian to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry. Today's lecture has a slightly interesting story. So, most of you may know that Dr. Ramachandran delivered the last Varahmihira Science Forum lecture last month, which was last year, at the end of which Professor Swaminathan asked him to do so every year. And since the new year is here, he was kind enough to oblige. Now, he needs to. This is actually not slight deviation from the regular lectures we have here. Most of our lectures are for the general public. They are not necessarily for the targeted scientific technical audience. We want to take science to the general public. That is kind of the intention of the founding of Varahmihira Science Forum. People have requested us to, give us, get us speakers to talk about the gravitational waves and relativity and discoveries that are very, very complicated. And we're like, we basically just, we kind of sort of understand how the cell phone works, but not really. So we want to kind of get a generic understanding of simple science that we think we understood in school or whatever, how we use it. And,
a European conference, and he wondered if he could find a hall and an audience. Yeah, thank you for obliging. So, slightly different background. Most of us know that Freud is, the father of psychoanalysis in psychiatry and so on. But some of us may not know that several of his theories have been discredited by scientists, especially with discoveries in, neurological science, actual study of the as is clearly shown there, it's a mouthful. Center for Brain Cognition and Psychology Department at the University of California in San Diego. He's famous as the author of 2 books for the lay public, which is absolutely delightful books. If you haven't read them, buy them right away and then read them. Phantoms in the Brain and the Telltale Brain. He's given lectures all over the world, a superstar speaker, as you all know. And so we are totally delighted that, at such short notice, he has consented to grace our forum with this particular lecture. So without further ado, Dr. Ramachandran.
Okay, I want to make sure all the audio is working. The back, can people hear me? It's not on?
Yeah.
Yes, now? It's not on yet. Okay, now it's on. All right, am I audible at the back? Before you start, okay, excellent. So I was here in Chennai visiting, and it turns out I have to give a lecture in Europe a couple of days from now, and because of conflicting schedules, I couldn't make it. So they suggested, why don't you send a tape instead? And you play the tape there. So that's what then I approached my good friend Gopu and I said, could you do this for me? All I need is a dummy audience. I don't even. And he said, no, you'll get a real audience. And so here we are, right? So I'm happy for that. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's of great interest to almost everyone, right? Freud. And try to give it a novel twist if I can, not just a review of his ideas. And let me also apologize to the audience for not being here in person. I mean, I'm talking to the European crowd. I have to switch hats here because of unforeseen circumstances. But I hope this DVD will give you some idea of what we've been thinking about and the relevance of Freud to modern neuroscience. Now, if you look at the history of ideas on Freud and my own reading of this history, I've always had an ambivalent view about Freud. I've had a love-hate relationship, you might say, with Freud. On the one hand, the man was far-sighted and very highly intelligent, and one would legitimately say he was a genius, given the impact he has had on the ethos of our age. On the other hand, he also talked a lot of nonsense, things like penis envy and Oedipus complex, which nobody takes seriously. And he also has had tremendous impact on neuroscience, but more so on the humanities. Everybody knows about Freud's influence on humanities. Literature, for example. You have to only read Jane Austen to get a deep insight into human nature, much deeper than any big tome written by a professional scientist. And she uses a lot of the ideas of Freudian ideas. Many novelists have deeper insight into our minds than scientists. So I've had an ambivalent attitude. On the one hand, I think he's regarded as a genius, and I think he is. On the other hand, I think he talked a lot of nonsense, and unfortunately, his impact, he had a disproportionate impact on sociology and social sciences, especially in literature and especially cafe intellectuals, chain-smoking cafe intellectuals from the left bank, both in Paris and in Delhi. Now, this is unfortunate, and you see a lot of these ideas don't make any sense, not even coherent, but other ideas have stood the test of time and are very valuable. So now what I do for a living is look at patients who have sustained it. Is that me? Sorry about that. My unconscious mind. I don't even, an Indian phone, I don't even know how to switch it off. Thank you. So, if you look at the history of ideas in science as a whole, not just Freud, and not just neurology and psychiatry, but science as a whole, you find it's been punctuated by tremendous upheavals of thought, which we call revolutions, scientific revolutions. Thomas Kuhn referred to this, coined this phrase, scientific revolutions, which is stuck. Namely, if you look at the history, one of the earliest scientific revolutions was the idea that the sun is not the center, the Earth is not the center of the solar system, the sun is. We are not the center of the cosmos, center of the solar system. We're just a little speck of dust floating in the wilderness of space. In fact, the sun is the center of the solar system. The so-called geocentric theory of the universe was replaced by the heliocentric theory of Copernicus. So-called Copernican revolution, although it should be called Aryabhatan revolution, goes back much earlier than Copernicus. Now that people shook our view of the world, right, at that time, even to this day. The second great revolution was the, you might say, Darwinian revolution. The notion that we are not the pinnacle of civilization or evolution. We're just a bunch of hairless Neotenous apes, which happen to be slightly cleverer than the other apes. And we have managed to find ourselves a suitable way of lifestyle which enables us to survive. And these hairless, puny Neotenous apes were able to leave babies slightly more often than the other apes. That's all. That's all evolution cares about. That's all biology cares about. That's you. That's us, all of us here. Okay. Now that diminishes human nature, human stature, our place in, and that was the second great revolution, that we are not something special. I'm not saying I believe this, by the way, but this is the standard view of human evolution and the history of ideas. History of ideas. The third great revolution was what? Was the Freudian revolution. Namely that you're thinking you have free will and you're making choices, you're making decisions, you live your life, that's your basic assumption. The fundamental axiom driving all your actions and behaviors is that you have free will. You're in charge. You're not a puppet. But in fact, Freud showed or suggested that your behavior is really governed by a cauldron of motives and unconscious motives and drives and feelings and desires which you're not even conscious of. And what you call human nature or human action or whatever is an elaborate rationalization. Post hoc, what do you call human life is an elaborate post hoc rationalization of things you really do for other reasons. Just think about it. Everything you do, really a rationalization for things you really do for other reasons. That was Freud's fundamental insight. Now you could then go on to add other insights, since the DNA, that life is a molecule. There's no vital force, vital essence, none of that. It's basically a molecule. Then Francis Crick and Watson discovered the double helix, the two helices wound together, and noticed the complementarity of the helices on the two sides of the helix. And the analogy between the complementarity of the helix and the resemblance of the offspring and parent. So the parent-offspring complementarity mimics the complementarity, the metaphor of the complementarity of the molecule. This flash of insight linking two completely unrelated things, a molecule and its double helix and template, and offspring and parent, marks the dawn of biology, modern biology. That flash of insight. I mean, exaggerating, of course, but something along those lines. And it's not simply they did DNA and all that, but the importance of DNA for heredity. Subsequent translation of the genetic code, and modern rest is history, as they say. Now, the next great revolution I'm going to maintain, next great revolution, and Freud had this in mind, is going to be the neuroscience revolution. Already there's some promise of this happening. That what you regard as your conscious mind, your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, your sense of self, even what you regard as your precious sense of self, your personality, the anguish you experience in certain situations, the pain, the love, all of this is the activity of ion channels in the brain. Just a bunch of sodium, potassium ions and calcium ions going across membranes. The activity of 100 billion wisps of jelly inside your dark cranial cavity is creating this whole symphony in front of you. All of us sitting here chatting and all that, feeling self-important and giving lectures, listening to lectures. But this is all just going, there's all these bunch of neurons firing away, right? So this is highly insulting, almost, to human dignity. Everything that science has shown so far is insulting to human dignity. Although there is a grandeur in this view of life, as Darwin once pointed out. And we'll see why he thought that. Okay, so that's so far about the background. And I don't want to give you a detailed introduction to Freud because you're all specialists in psychoanalysis or psychotherapy and neurology, so I won't go into details, but just give you the basics. Now we turn to our approach in our lab is to look at patients who have sustained injury to a small part of the brain as a result of a stroke, head injury, or tumor. A small injury in the brain results in a characteristic deficit depending on the location of the lesion. You don't get an across-the-board reduction in all your mental abilities, a blunting of your cognitive capacities, of your mind. You get a highly selective loss of one function with other functions being preserved, intact. This gives you confidence in asserting that that function is mediated by that structure in the brain. Structure-function correlation, which began with Paul Broca in the 19th century and has continued to this day to yield valuable insights into brain function. So some of you here may be molecular biologists or biologists. The analogy here is with the chromosome. When you figure out that the chromosome has DNA, and then there are stripes there which mark the different sections of DNA. And the DNA molecule, if you zap it with an X-ray, you get a mutant, and the stripes change. This means that the genetic information is in the chromosome. That was a very valuable insight. And then that led to people understanding DNA, and the rest is history. Likewise, we're trying to localize different functions in different parts of the brain, and then mapping function onto structure allows us to elucidate how that function is mediated by that circuit in the brain. Okay, so we look at, basically we study patients, right? And look for deficits and try and explain these deficits. And the whole lecture can be about that, but that's not what I'm going to talk about mainly, right? But I'll give you some examples of Freud himself, by the way. I want to add that Freud himself was, let's change slides here. By the way, these are just various collaborators who are involved in this aspect of my research on neuropsychoanalysis. There's Bill Herstein, who's now in East Coast University, and there's yours truly there, and others. Some of you may have guessed this slide was made by Bill Herstein and sent to me yesterday. Okay, so just by way of introduction, some of you may be the students, the brain is made up of 100 billion nerve cells, each of which is a fundamental unit of the nervous system and can either be on or off the nerve cell, can be inhibitory or excitatory, right? You see, example, it's made up of these. The neuron slide is not there, no? Further down. Okay, there it is. Okay, so it's made up of these neurons, 100 billion of these. Each neuron makes 1,000 to 10,000 contacts with other neurons, points called synapses. Synapses can be excitatory, inhibitory. Based on this information, they calculated that the number of possible brain states exceeds the number of possible elementary particles in the known universe, any given brain, even Trump's brain. Okay. So you've got this staggering complexity to deal with. How you're going to study it? One approach is to do brain imaging, see what part lights up when you perform an action. Another approach, the one we take, is to look at changes in the brains of some people, the result of stroke or head injury, whatever, and then see how the mind changes when the brain is damaged. And correlate structure and function and deduce what's going on in the brain. That's our approach. And it overlaps with Freud's agenda to some extent. Now, most of us think of Freud, you think of Oedipus complex, you think of psychology. And sure enough, most of his impact has been on psychology. But he himself began his career as a medical student, as a physician. He was trained as a doctor, Freud. And in fact, in neurology. And after his training in neurology, he went and worked with the famous anatomist Minor. I'm not sure, maybe not Minor, but a famous anatomist. And he studied the nervous system of a lamprey. It's easy to tackle. This was part of his PhD work and his medical research work. The nervous system of the lamprey is studied in excruciating detail. Lamprey is a little fish-like creature, ancestral to fishes, very primitive fish. So he studied this, saying that eventually we have to explain human nature. The Oedipus complex, depending on what's firing it, what the circuitry here will tell me the answer. That was his faith, right? Then soon he said, well, this is exercise in futility. How can studying a lamprey tell you about penis envy? Right, so he regarded this as a waste of time, and then he became disillusioned completely. Then he said, I'm going to throw away neuroanatomy, forget the brain, focus on human behavior, studied in the field, so to speak. Interactions with people, with patients, get their stories from them. Can you glean some understanding of human nature by studying normal people and indeed studying dreams, studying people with psychological abnormalities? Just by doing that before you get to the nervous system. So that was the second phase in his career. He started doing, and then he's produced all those books he's famous for. Interpretation of dreams, what else? Jokes, all these psychological phenomena he started studying and spent about 20 or 30 years, became famous with all that. But then he realized that this is not getting him anywhere. You just get a surface level description, a very inadequate understanding of what's going on by looking at just the output of the system, right? So he went back to the early boyhood dream to understand the brain understand the mind in terms of brain function, and he published what's now called the Manifesto for Scientific Psychology, or what is it called again? Not Manifesto. Project for Scientific Psychology, that's right. Project for Scientific, published in 1895, where he claims that all this is a waste of time. Don't just look at psychology, don't look at have patients lying on the bed and talk to them. Go look at the nervous system, study the anatomy of the nervous system, and try and relate this to function. You will then solve the problem of how consciousness emerges in the brain, and what makes us human, what the mind is. So Freud changed his mind. But then he couldn't get it, he couldn't do it because the technology was not good enough. His idea was on the right track, but the technology was too primitive to achieve this bridge between mind and brain, which he wanted to achieve. He could not do that. Now what I'm going to do is talk about my cases and tell you about some instances where Freud's ideas have been debunked. So this is nonsense, it's not what's going on. Right? Something else is going on. But still it was useful because it gave you a challenge. We explained this phenomenon in Freudian terms. Now, can you do better? And I said, yes, I can do physiology and come up with a brain explanation which is actually has a wider range of explanatory power than the psychological approach you have. So that we've done in a number of cases, and I can give examples. In other instances, it turns out that in fact the Freudian approach can inform the neurology. And you can learn something from Freud's views on the brain and mind. It doesn't happen very often, but there are a couple of examples I'll mention. Is that clear? two agendas. One, how Freud's ideas have been borrowed and made their way into neurology, explain some of the curious behavior we see in our patients. The other one is the other way around. If there's a Freudian explanation for a strange syndrome, we disprove it clearly and say this is wrong. Let's replace it with a scientific or more biological explanation. Let's look at some examples. Capgras syndrome, a disorder called Capgras syndrome, C-A-P-G-R-A-S. How many of you have heard of Capgras syndrome? Please raise your hands. 3 of you, okay. You read it in my book, okay. That's all right. So now, it was not widely known until about 20 years ago, till we sort of resurrected it from the old literature of psychology. And it refers to the fact that a guy suffers a head injury or has some other injury to the brain, damage to the brain. He's been a perfectly normal guy, suddenly comes to his parents and he looks at his mother and he says, Mom, this woman, doctor, she's not my mother. She's an imposter pretending to be my mother. So why do you say that? No, I know that. I can tell she's not my mother. She's an imposter. She sounds like an imposter. She looks like an imposter. She's an imposter. She's not my mother. She looks exactly like my mother physically, but there's something missing. She's an imposter. Called the imposter delusion of Capgras syndrome, described by the French neurologist Capgras. Now, what's going on here? Why would a perfectly sane person suddenly start saying his mother is an imposter? Right? Sometimes seen in schizophrenics too, but also after head injury. I've seen patients after head injury. Now, the old theory which you find in many old psychiatry textbooks is the following. This chap, when he was a little infant, tiny little infant, had a strong sexual attraction to his mother. I don't believe this, but this is the so-called Oedipus complex of Freud. Now, as the brain grows, these latent limbic urges, sexual attraction to the mother, these limbic urges, it arrives in the limbic system of the brain, the emotional core of the brain, gets suppressed by the cortex which develops as the child develops. Thank God, otherwise you'd all be sexually turned on by your mother. And then, so far so good, there's a blow to the head, the cortex is damaged, this inhibition of the sexual urges is removed, and suddenly and inexplicably you find yourself being sexually attracted to your mother. The only way the guy can make any sense of this is to say, my God, she's my mom, how can I get sexually turned on? This must be some other strange person, some woman pretending to be my mother, something like that. It's a very ingenious explanation, as indeed most Freudian explanations are. It doesn't work. I'll tell you why. Because I've seen patients, I'm thinking of one particular patient, who had the same delusion about his pet poodle. Doctor, this poodle is not mine. I mean, this is not Fifi. It's some other poodle pretending to be Fifi. Now, how do you invoke the Freudian explanation there? You have to invoke the bestiality latent in all humans, or some such thing, some such rubbish. Right? You can't explain that. So I've said this can't be right. It can't be sexual attraction to your mother. Something else is going on. So what we did was to simply come up with a theory which is quite simple, straightforward. It turns out if you go to the brain, there's a cortex, of course, the outer folded structure we call the cortex, neocortex. And then there's a thalamus in the middle, and then there is the hypothalamus, and all these structures which you may have learned about in school. And there's a limbic core of the brain, including the limbic system, which is involved in emotional reaction to events in the world, to objects in the world, emotional reaction. So if you see a lion or a tiger, or a burglar or a potential mate, your heart starts beating. Why does that happen? What happens is the image goes to the visual, from the visual cortex, vision, you see the lion or the tiger, and then it gets you may see a piece of wood or something which is completely innocuous and no relevance to your life, right? Harmless. Then it goes to the fusiform gyrus here. Oops, sorry. Goes to a structure called the fusiform gyrus in the temporal lobe, tucked away in the inside of the temporal lobe. It's involved in recognition of objects, faces, numbers, any sort of naming of an object and recognizing what it is involves the fusiform gyrus, especially faces. So what happens, the message about the face or whatever you're looking at goes to the fusiform gyrus, which just, this is a face, it's so-and-so's face. And all the semantic networks are evoked. My mother, she used to feed me milk, she used to give me chocolates and all that. She'd take me to therapy, whatever. My mother. But then what happens is, after that, there's a wire that goes from the fusiform gyrus to a structure called the amygdala and other limbic structures to evoke the appropriate emotion for what you're looking at. If I'm looking at this thing, I don't get sexually aroused. If I look at that cell phone there, I don't get hungry. So I don't get any arousal from neutral objects, but if there's something salient in the environment, like a mate or a prey or a predator, then my autonomic nervous system, this limbic system, gets aroused and sends a cascade of impulses down the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic nerves. It causes your heart to beat faster, pump more blood, dilatation of cerebral blood vessels, and where the blood is required for the brain to act as needed. Blood vessels to the muscles dilate to supply oxygen to the muscles because you're going to run away from the predator, exertion, impending exertion. Chase a mate, you need blood to the heart and to the brain. That's why it's shifted. So the coronary blood vessels dilate. All these changes, cascade of changes taking place in a matter of seconds. Sympathetic nervous system. And you sweat too. You sweat because you dissipate the heat generated from action. And your palm sweats. It means I can put 2 electrodes in the palm and measure the change in sweating. Tell me how aroused you are when you look at something. You may claim you're not attracted to somebody, but I put you in the GSR machine and I put the electrodes. If I see you start sweating, I say, no, you're lying. It's the basis of lie detector. It's crude, not very accurate, but it works half the time. So you're measuring the emotional reaction of a person to an object or a person or another person or to an object or an event in the world. Objectively, without asking them. If you ask them, all sorts of rationalizations and denials kick in. Many layers before the speech output, which can contaminate the signal. Here you get the pure emotional, core emotional reaction to the event. That's why we do galvanic skin response. So my idea was this chap has got fusiform gyrus is intact, temporal lobes are intact, occipital lobes are intact. He can see the mother. He gets activity in the fusiform gyrus face area. He recognizes the mother's face, recognized in quotes. Evokes association. She's my mother. She took me to Tirupati and all that. But the wire that goes from there to the limbic system is cut by the accident. Now what does that mean? I mean, he's not going to get the arousal he would get from seeing his mother. But believe it or not, any one of you here, if I put you in front of a computer and show you pictures of mailman and tigers, and buses and chairs and all that, you won't get any reaction. A stranger, you won't get any skin response. But if I put a picture of your mother there, you get a huge jolt in your galvanic skin response. You start sweating. I mean, anytime you look at your mother, you start sweating. All of you. That's astonishing, right? It gives you a way of measuring a person's arousal when you see your mother, or a pin-up or anything. So I tried this on this guy, and my prediction was that this wire is cut, therefore he would not get an increase in GSR when he saw his mother, unlike all of us normal people. Sure enough, we put him there, we showed him chairs and tables, there's no reaction, obviously. Showed him strangers' pictures, there's no reaction. We showed him his mother's picture, flat, no reaction, no galvanic skin response. Which means our theory is on the right track, that there is a disconnection. He can see his mother, visual processing is normal, recognize her as potentially resembling his mother. And his emotions are normal, he can laugh, he cries, he cracks jokes, but the connection between vision and emotion is cut. So he sees his mother, but there's no emotion. He says, the only way he can explain it is this woman is an imposter. It turns out there's a much more intellectually satisfying explanation than saying, he's sexually attracted to his mother and that's why this happened. There's an example of the Freudian view being replaced by the more scientific, testable hypothesis, which you can go and test in a few hours and show that you're on the right track. Now, it gets even more interesting. If this chap now goes to his, if the chap who says, you're not my mother, David, is the name of this student, goes to the adjacent room and the mother phones him, picks up the phone. David, Mom, where have you been? Great to hear from you. It's wonderful to hear from you. Terrific. No delusion. David, are you doing okay? I'm doing fine. There's this old lady who keeps coming there telling me she's my mother. Where are you? I want you to come back home. Then he walks back. She walks back after half an hour and says, who are you? You look just like my mother. Where does that happen? Again, go look at the neuroanatomy. It turns out there's a separate band of fibers from the auditory cortex. The auditory cortex, the temporal lobes, which sends signals again to the limbic structures. And that band of fibers is not cut by the accident. Therefore, you cut one band of fibers for vision. There's disconnection between vision and emotion. He can't be aroused visually. But hearing bypasses that, goes straight to the limbic system, produces arousal. That comes back, and he says, that's my mom, and he's warm and effusive. Now, somebody here is going to ask me, but what if she comes and starts talking to him? He's getting the voice, right? And you're also getting vision. Why does he not correct his delusion? The answer is it doesn't work like the brain. It's not always logical. a statistical machine. Our brains of primates rely heavily on vision. We're visual creatures. We evolved in the treetops. At least most of you believe that. Treetops, and then jumping from branch to branch, eating fruit, catching flies and all that. So you've got very powerful stereoscopic vision, color vision, and you rely a lot on vision. Because visual input is highly ambiguous, by the way. You look at the world and it looks all rich and three-dimensional. You say, oh my God, wonderful, our brain is processing all this information instantly. It's a complete illusion. You're doing guesswork all the time. And what you have here in front of you is a highly impoverished representation of what's real out there. But it's good enough for you to leave babies. Remember that rule. That's all the brain cares about. Not about optimality. The brain does not care about optimality. It cares about adequacy. So leave enough babies, that's fine. So it's a very crude system. And that's how it works. Okay? A bunch of parallel tricks, heuristics for solving visual problems. Now, so going back to the cartographiation. Why does it not correct her delusion when she hears it talking? The answer is, it says, I place much great weighting on the visual information. Visually, she doesn't do it for me. So I don't think she's real my mother, even though the voice is telling me she's my mother. The visual appearance overrides the voice. It makes sense. If somebody comes here tomorrow, if I come here tomorrow with a sore throat and I talk slightly differently, you're not going to say, who are you? You look just like Ramachandran. Except for your voice. You're going to say, Rama, what's wrong with your throat, right? It shows your reliance on visual cues and not on auditory signals. Right, sorry. Yeah, if I'm inaudible, please raise your hands and I'll repeat. I have no problem doing that. Okay, so here's an example of our strategy. A seemingly incomprehensible neuropsychiatric disorder, where a young man, after a head injury, claims that his mother is an imposter in person. On the phone, he says she's his mother, he accepts her completely. Bewildering, completely incomprehensible, but you can make sense of this, reject the Freudian explanation, and make sense of what's going on in terms of the known neurocircuitry of the brain, and it's enriched your understanding of the neural processing of visual signals. This is the strategy we used again and again and again. Another example of rejecting the Freudian view. I'm going to come on, support him to it later, as you see, but for the Freudians here. But first, I'm going to, do Freud bashing. Second one is it's called apotomenophilia. Apotomenophilia, funny name. Xenomelia, which means the person wants his arm amputated. Believe it or not, there's some people, 0.2% of the population, not that rare, 0.2 to 0.5% of the population, who want an arm amputated, a healthy arm amputated. Guy comes to me and he says, Dr. Ramachandran, I heard about your interest in cases, very strange cases. I have this issue. What's your issue? I want somebody to amputate my arm above my elbow. And he takes a felt pen and he draws the line below which he wants amputation on that line. Is that clear? Immediately, I've heard of this before, but I haven't seen a patient before. First time I've seen it. It was absolutely astonishing. And I said, when did you first experience it? He said, from early childhood, as far back in childhood as possible. I had nurtured this desire to amputate my own arm. Never told anybody, never got it done, but it's really annoying when you get it done. 2/3 of these patients go and get it amputated. It's a very serious medical problem. They get it amputated. Imagine losing a limb. You talk about losing life and limb, right? Nothing more important than in your arm. And they voluntarily get it amputated. And then they become happy. They lose the depression, become happy, typically. So what's going on here? Now, people thought they were completely nuts. Whatever that means, right? That's not an explanation. They said that the guys are nuts, right? Now, our approach is to go and look at the anatomy, physiology, and see what's going on in the brain. So I said, well, maybe these people have, if you look at the brain, surface of the brain, this brown strip here, the post-central gyrus, has a complete map of the body surface on the surface of the brain. I'm going to show you a picture of that. Where's the map? Oh, there, okay. There's the map of the body surface and surface of the brain. You can see there's all different body parts, thumb, index finger, middle finger, elbow, and all that. There's something peculiar about this map. Anybody know what's peculiar about the map? Map of the body surface on the brain, on the surface of the brain. You just touch different parts of the body and then record from the brain. This is active, this is active, this is active, and you map it out completely. So what's peculiar? Peculiar here. Anybody? Well, what's peculiar is that the head is not where it should be. It's below the hand. In fact, it should be near the neck, right? It's a continuous map, but in fact, it's below the hand. Why? Something lost in our phylogeny. We don't know why, but I will get back to that in a minute. Secondly, the genitals are not where they should be between the thighs, they're actually near the feet. God knows why. They're near the feet, okay? All of this has clinical implications. Now, we have these patients come in, and I'm going to tell you about phantom limbs in a minute, but first let's talk about epitomophilia. We knew of the existence of this map, and I said this map is there probably congenitally, hardwired in your brain, partly. Now, maybe this map of the body image in your brain surface is missing the hand in this chap because of some faulty wiring. Therefore, it doesn't feel like it's part of him. Just like you, if I tell you you got a tail, you say, I don't have a tail. But your ancestors had tails, right? So maybe this guy has no missing region in this representation of the hand. How do you test that? You can do brain imaging, or you can do, brain imaging, easiest way to do it. So we did brain imaging. We touched him different parts of the body, measured this activity, and completely normal throughout the brain. Our theory was wrong. So the notion that patch of cortex is missing is wrong. Then we say we give up. No, don't give up. Next step, what about next stage in processing? S2, somatosensory 2, another map. This map sends messages to the second map. Again, you have a map of the body surface. Then a third region in the brain called SPL, superior parietal lobule, in the right hemisphere. SPL is involved in creating a multi-dimensional, multi-sensory, dynamic image of your own body, called body image. When I close my eyes and I do this, I have this vivid image, my hands moving, my shoulders shaking, my head nodding, and I open my eyes, it confirmed what I just felt, right? So all this confirmation, this convergence of visual, vestibular, balance sense, and proprioceptive, muscle and joint sense, and all of this converging in the right superior parietal lobule to create a body image, a vibrant image of your body, dynamic image of your body, in navigating space and time, what you call yourself, your person. That map, you went and recorded from there, and sure enough, that map was missing the hand. When you touch the hand, there was no activity, unlike normal people. Much simpler experiment which we did earlier was to do galvanic skin. You don't remember galvanic skin response. I poke somebody with a needle. You show something like a tiger or something, you get a galvanic skin response. Because when you get aroused, the visual signal goes and activates the limbic system, cascades down the autonomic nervous system, causing you to sweat and dilate blood vessels and all that. We already talked about this in the context of Capgras. Same principle. Capgras, you're talking about vision. Here you're talking about poking with a needle, pain. Poke with a needle or touch him, push him or do something like that, slightly unpleasant. Goes to S1, this map here, records it. If it's unpleasant, it also goes to the amygdala and insula, goes to anterior cingulate. I'm just fancy names, which means that brain structure is concerned with emotional reaction to pain. And so that's the cascade of events that leads to what happens in normal people. In this guy, this has been removed. This doesn't exist. But we said, what if you measure the galvanic skin response when I poke different parts of his body? Measure the galvanic skin response. Instead of showing him a lion or a tiger or a mother on the screen, I poke or pinch his body in different parts. Will you get a galvanic? The answer is yes. If you gently touch him, you won't get it. But if you poke him, even lightly, you get a galvanic skin response from that part of the body. Is that clear? You're measuring his sweating and his emotional reaction to different sensory inputs, be it visual, in the experiment I mentioned earlier, Capgras syndrome, or tactile, in this experiment I'm going to tell you now. In the patient with epitomophilia, the guy claimed that he wants his arm removed. He went and tested his body parts, touching different body parts and asking whether there's a galvanic skin response. Question is, if you come to the offensive part, the part he doesn't wants removed, would you get a reduction in galvanic skin response? Is that clear? Because he doesn't, maybe there's no representation here, so it should be reduced. When we looked at it, and what we found is the exact opposite. It often happens in science. The galvanic skin response was higher in this region than in the normal hand or any other region. Why? The reason is, the messages in, remember the map in S1 is completely normal. Sorry. But that map is completely normal. Right, that's S1. So the vertical strip of cortex behind the central sulcus, that's completely normal. It's only when you get further back to the superior parietal lobule, abnormality is there. So the messages go from the hand all the way to the cortex, processed normally. Okay? Then it gets sent to the superior parietal lobule to construct a body image. There's no place for it to go to. That region is missing. So there's a discrepancy. And the brain abhors discrepancies. And the discrepancy is picked up by the amygdala and the limbic system and arousal. And go cascades down the autonomic nervous system and you get this galvanic skin response. That's hence the unpleasantness of the arm. I don't want it. You can't even articulate. I can't explain to you exactly what I'm feeling. So if something about it is annoying, my arm is annoying. I can't explain it to you. His brain is wired in such a way he can't translate into words, into your words and my words, what he's experiencing in his mind. Some extraordinary experience he's having of not wanting the arm. Is it painful? No, it's not painful. Does it feel like it doesn't belong to you? It belongs to somebody else? No, it doesn't. It doesn't feel like it. It feels like it over belongs to me. It's intrusive, like an unwanted child or a jilted lover. It's sort of clinging to me, and I want to get rid of it. And then I'll be happy. Then you go and get rid of it or amputate it. You can do it in Mexico. I didn't do it. Send it to Mexico. Right? You get it amputated. The guy's happy, completely normal. He was actually dean of an engineering school in Texas. Dean, I won't mention names, obviously. Not allowed to. But anyway, so he's now a happy guy, having done this. He says, I feel like a whole human person. Look at the irony of this. Remove the hand. For the first time in my life, I feel like a whole human being. Real human being, what he said. Okay, so there again, now, what's the Freudian view on epitomenophilia? Freudian theory, before we came along, very different. The guy is cutting his arm off because a cry for attention. A deep-seated angst for connection with other people, cry for attention. Why do you want to remove the arm for that? Why don't you remove earlobe or bit of the nose? Why something as drastic as removing an arm? It just seems absurd. Another theory, which is even more ingenious, is they remove the entire arm to create an amputation stump, which resembles a giant penis, which they obviously enjoy having. So this is a serious theory proposed in books. I'm not making this up. And again, we think that's not the case. The answer is clearly in the neuroanatomy. Third example of a sort of a where Freudian explanation doesn't work is foot fetishes. You know, people have foot fetishes, obviously, even in this country. I mean, we have Madonna has a whole book on the foot, erotic potential of the foot. People like feet massaged or kissed or whatever, or all of that. This whole culture revolves around this business of foot massages, podiatrists, all this stuff. Now, the standard Freudian explanation for this is the foot resembles, what is, guess? The foot resembles the penis. This is complete nonsense. I mean, why not hand fetish? Why not nose fetish? Why foot fetish? I think the answer is clearly in the anatomy. All right, there. Where is the foot? It's right. The genitals are right next to the foot. So when the foot is removed, amputated, for example, we have seen the sensory input from the genital skin, destined to the skin of the genitals, normally goes to the genital area of the cortex. It invades the vacated territory corresponding to the missing foot. You amputated the foot, no signals coming to the foot area. The skin of the genitals projects to the genitals area just below it, now invades that vacated territory. You now stimulate the penis or sexual organs. The person experiences sensations, orgasm in the foot, in the missing foot. There's a crosstalk between these two areas, and the adjacency suggests that even in normal people, not amputation, there's some sloppy wiring, some crosstalk, which explains why stimulating the feet leads to erotic sensations. This is the great thing about science. You can just do these simple experiments to find out about phantom pain, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and you stumble on a phenomenon that explains foot fetishes. That's what makes science fun, right? I mean, you don't know which direction it's going to take you. Who would have thought about foot fetishes, right? So you can replace the Freudian interpretation. Okay, now let me talk a little bit about phantom limb since I raised it. And we're getting pretty short of time, but I'm going to go fast here. So phantom limbs, many of you already know this. It's been widely publicized, perhaps too widely. But basically, if you remove a person's arm, there's a tumor or a crush injury in a car accident, the arm is removed, continues to vividly feel the presence of a missing arm, called a phantom limb, known for hundreds of years. People didn't do experiments on this, by the way. Funnily enough, neurology was never an experimental science. It only recently became an experimental science. Just observation and description. It's descriptive, not experimental, unlike physics. But a handful of people throughout the world are now transforming it into an experimental science. So one of the things we notice is when an arm is removed in a patient, an amputee with the upper limb removed, you go and touch his face or touch his body or touch a different part, ask him what does he feel, where does he feel it? Part of any routine neuro exam, I blindfold you and I touch different parts of your body, you say, close your eyes, close your eyes. Where did I touch? Don't look. Where did I touch?
The left hand.
Left hand, okay. How about here?
Belly.
Okay, good. What about that? Okay, he's completely normal. He's a normal guy, okay. So now if you remove the arm, I'm not going to do it, but if you remove the arm and I touch his face, the extraordinary thing is he'll now report that the sensations on his face are now in his missing arm, not in addition to being on the face. The sensation on this guy, look at this guy. Left arm was removed, touched different parts of his body, shoulder, nothing, he feels on his shoulder, belly, he starts giggling, tickling. You go to this cheek area and you touch it, he says, my God, I'm feeling on my phantom thumb. We discovered this. Pinky, phantom index finger. You got a map of the missing hand on the face. Why? It's because, again, of the diagram there. Sorry. Diagram here. So when you remove the arm, this region of the brain does not receive any signals. Okay, is that clear? This guy does not get any signals that the arm has been removed. So the signals that come from the skin, the axons which project to the face area below it, invade the vacated territory corresponding to the missing hand, activates the neurons there, propagates into the brain, and the brain misinterprets the signal that's coming from the missing phantom hand. Clear? No? Shall I repeat that? Or? Okay. Sorry. You've got a complete map of the body surface there. Every part is represented in a part of the brain. When you remove the hand, this area of the brain does not get any input anymore. This area is blank. No input. Cortex is there. So sensory input from the face skin, which normally comes to the face area, which is right next to it, invades the vacated territory there because it's hungry for new sensory input. It invades it, and then it starts activating those cells. So when I touch the face skin, it activates not only face area like it used to, now activates the hand area, cross-wiring. The brain then mistakes this as coming from the missing hand. That's where it gets from. Now we've been studying this for a long time now. The basic idea you can use for treating phantom limbs is now widely used throughout the world, using a mirror, but I'm not going to talk about that today, so we'll skip that. But one thing I'll mention is, maybe many of you don't know, is one of the things we noticed is this wonderful theory, there's something wrong with it. What's wrong with it is when we look at the patient, look at the patient, look at the map. Look at the map carefully. About one-third of the patients we've seen have this map on the face. Okay, all right, now, my explanation notwithstanding, okay, so that's a map. So my theory was when you remove the hand, input to the face invades that area and then starts activating. What's wrong? What's wrong with the theory? That's correct. Excellent. Are you a neurologist or? Oh, whatever it is, you're very honest. Okay, if you look at this, the head is right side up, everything else upside down. Therefore, normally in the normal brain, you look at any medical textbook, any textbook of neurology, medicine, any of the psychology textbook, you'll find that the hand is right next to this face, and the face is right side up, everything else upside down. The way famous Canadian surgeon Wilder Penfield published a book with this diagram, which has become iconic of human neuroanatomy, localization of function in the brain, all of that. It's an iconic image, widely known. But I find that, in fact, my theory, my maps are always here on the face. They're not on the forehead, which is closer to the hand, right? So why don't you get, if you touch his forehead, you should get sensation in the hand. Why is it cheek? Well, there's only two possibilities. Logically, there's only two possibilities. One possibility is that I'm wrong, theory is wrong. Right? Sometimes I reluctantly accept that. Another possibility is he's wrong. The Penfield is wrong. He's a surgeon, so I thought obviously he's wrong and I'm right. I was giving this lecture, and a guy in Stanford, a young resident, postdoc, stood up and he said, Dr. Ramachandran, we're actually doing brain imaging next week, mapping S1 and S2. We can map it in more detail and tell you what's going on. I said, fine, because I looked for this map, original data on which this map is based, in Penfield's old notes. Not there. All the books, everything, they reprint the same old one book, the source. Same mistake gets repeated everywhere. And that book, when I looked at Penfield's data, based on half a dozen points, or dozen points, very few points. For some reason, the artist put it upside down, based on 2 or 3 points, just noise. I said, clearly, if you do the mapping correctly, with more samples, you're going to get the head right side up. Sure enough, he phoned me the next week, and he said, Dr. Ramachandran, you're right, the head should be the other way around. In fact, the head should be, the diagram should be like that. So I'm saying that every medical textbook should be, this chapter should be redone. I mean, this map should be corrected. I'm not telling you this because it matters a lot whether the head is upside down or right side up. Who cares? Who cares? I mean, theoretically, it's not very important. I'm saying it because I take great sadistic delight in showing in a 5-minute experiment that 50 years of neurology books have got it wrong. With a Q-tip. And 5 minutes. That's why it's got, it appeals to me. Okay. All right, now that's okay, we're talking about, okay, let's get back to Freud now. There's a curious disorder called anosognosia, denial of illness, where you play down the seriousness of your own deficits, your own illness. It turns out this is a wonderful arena to explore Freud's ideas. And you get a patient with a left hemisphere stroke. Stroke affects the fibers going from the left hemisphere down to the spinal, down the brainstem to spinal cord, affects your movements. Orchestrates a sequence of muscle twitches which causes you to move your hand, grabbing something or shaking hands or whatever. That's the cascade of events. Now it turns out when that's damaged, you get hemiparesis, you get paralysis. The patient is very upset about this. He says, when am I going to get better, doctor? There's some rehab procedures using mirrors. Can I try that? Can I change my diet in some way? They're very, very concerned, obviously, because they lost their function of the arm, right? They should be concerned, and they are. But if you take the right hemisphere damage, equivalent paralysis, completely dead left arm, a certain proportion of them, fairly large proportion, maybe 5 to 15% of them, will deny the paralysis or will play it down. What do I mean by that? They'll either completely engage in complete outright denial. Like, for example, a patient sitting here, I said, Mrs. D, how are you feeling? I'm feeling fine. Hospital food sucks. That's fine. Okay, tell me more. My name is so-and-so. Okay. Is anybody coming to visit you? My son's in Chula Vista. He's going to come and visit me tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Perfectly articulate young lady was telling me about her family and what's in. Okay, important to establish that. The person can't talk, you can't do any of the experiments. They have to understand your instructions, be able to talk. Mental status should be normal, all that. Establish that first. Then you do the experiment. Ask her, tell me about your arm now. Can you use your arms? Yes. You've been in the hospital for 2 weeks, left arm completely paralyzed. Yes. So this is a woman who is completely paralyzed on the left side of the body, has not used her arm any time in the last 20 days in the hospital. And I come and ask her, can you use your arm? She says, yes, I can. Can you use your right arm? Yes, I can use my right arm. Can you use your left arm? Yes, I can use my left arm. All right, touch my nose with your right arm. Okay, touch my nose with your left arm. Are you touching my nose? Yes, indeed, it's almost there. It's about a centimeter from your nose. Clear example of a Freudian denial and almost a hallucination, right? She concocts that she imagines that her hand is touching my nose, right? Then I said, I couldn't help saying, I've seen dozens of patients. This is not my discovery. It goes back to early 19th century, early 20th century, Babinski. By the way, I want to take a little bit of a side here and talk about the role of single case studies in neurology and psychiatry. Many establishment scientists frown on this. What can you learn from one example? Maybe the guy's crazy, he's mouthing something, and you're drawing all these conclusions from that. This is a nonsensical criticism. First of all, you look at the history of neurology, all the great discoveries, aphasias, commissurotomy, denial, anosognosia, aphasias, Wernicke's aphasia, Broca's aphasia, neglect syndrome, all of these, 90% of them were discovered not by sifting through hundreds of cases, but an astute clinician making an observation about a patient, describing that case. And that has stood the test of time. Every one of them. 90% of the cases we see today were described in the 19th century, early 20th century, by astute neurologists studying single cases, sometimes two cases. Commissurotomy, split brain patient, another example. I can't think of a single example of a disease that was discovered by statistical analysis of hundreds of cases. No example. A simpler way of putting this, if I were to bring a pig here to the podium and I said, this pig can talk. I said, really? Wave my wand and starts talking. What are you going to say? You're not going to say, show me another pig. You're going to say, my God, how is it pig is talking? How is that possible? Obviously, you're not going to say, show me another pig and I'll believe it. That's what these experts do. They want a second pig. And sometimes they find it, of course. We find it takes a while. But initial discovery is often made on a single case. Freud did this time and again with his patients. We do it all the time. I do it all the time. But I don't stop with Freud. I go and do experiments on them to confirm what's going on in the brain and then come up with explanations which are relevant. The three agendas, when you do an experiment on a patient, the three agendas. One is, first, is he making it, is he lying? Can you elicit some symptoms that shows that he's not lying? And most of the time he's not lying, by the way, most of the time. If it's inexplicable, it's because you're not smart enough to figure it out. So you probe deeply, you find he's in fact speaking the truth as far as he's concerned. You have to find out why he's making up the story. Second agenda, to discover the brain mechanism involved. Is it a real phenomenon? Is he making it up? A. B. What is the brain mechanism involved in producing this effect? Third point, who cares? Somebody saying your arm is moving, who gives a shit? You need to prove that, you need to ideally put it in a broader context. Does it explain other phenomena in neuroscience? Does it make predictions? Or is it just something that explains this one phenomenon? So who cares is answered. Lastly, can you do something about it? Can you fix it to help the patient? All four motives in mind when you examine a new case with strange syndrome. Sometimes you succeed in one, sometimes two, sometimes three, sometimes you're lucky all four, like with phantom limbs or some of the other syndromes we've studied. But okay, having said that, so these oddities often have a very important role in science. Freud realized this. Oddities have an important role in driving scientific revolutions. What we call normal science, which is the bricklayers of science, who just cows chewing the cud of knowledge. The image of passive versus being a predator, being a paratrooper in science. Two different mentalities among scientists. So what I'm saying is that if you, okay, I'm losing my thread of, oh yeah. So from single cases you can learn a great deal, but you can also go wrong. You develop a nose for anomalies. An anomaly is when the brick is you created this great edifice. All the same scientists agree that this is what's going on. And one brick doesn't fit. One fact, one obstinate fact that just doesn't work. What do? You ignore it. You ignore it. What majority of my colleagues do this. They ignore this, right? Or you try to somehow warp the whole structure to accommodate this. That doesn't work either. And you can do that to some extent, but sometimes you just have to topple the whole damn edifice and restart. That's called a scientific revolution. Kuhn referred to that as scientific revolution. That drives change. It doesn't mean the previous edifice was a waste of time. This is how science progresses. You need not be ashamed that your edifice was torn down. Okay? So, in neurology in particular, and psychology, the examples of these anomalies, they're staring at you in the face, that people have ignored for 100 years, because it didn't make any sense, it didn't fit the big picture in science. I'm going to show you examples of denial in science, Freudian denial in science, how you can overcome these denials and make progress. So for example, there's a disease called, what's a bogus syndrome? A disease called Du Clermont syndrome. How many of you know about Du Clermont syndrome? You know because you read my book, but anybody else? Du Clermont syndrome. Okay, Du Clermont syndrome refers to a young lady who develops a fixation, obsession, that an old, rich, famous man is madly in love with her, but is in denial about it. I'm not making this up. It's actually, it's acknowledged to be a real syndrome in many medical textbooks. DSM. Right? This is just nonsense. There's no such syndrome. I mean, the converse of the syndrome, where a rich, old, famous man develops a delusion that this young hottie is in love with him, right? But is in denial about it, is much more common. But my colleagues, but there's no name for it because psychiatrists are mainly male. Right? Now, another syndrome which is even more funny, in my view, my colleagues won't agree necessarily, is chronic underachievement syndrome. Rampant among American teenagers on pot. Now, this is syndrome. In my day, we used to call it stupidity. Well, what is chronic underachievement syndrome? It doesn't mean anything, right? The third one is my favorite, all-time favorite. It's called oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. It's there in DSM, it's there diagnosis, it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which means a spirited youngster dares to challenge an authority figure, like the professor, or parent, or father, or indeed the physician who made the diagnosis. Now the man who invented this disease was a genius, because any attempt by the patient to protest the diagnosis can construed as additional evidence for the diagnosis. So you're stuck in a no-win situation, right? So the psychiatry is full of these examples of this kind. So you have to be careful in what you choose to work on. Otherwise you spend all your time working on polywater and spoon bending and all that. Okay? So and neurology and psychiatry especially, you have to be very, very, very careful. Okay, now, so this lady is clearly denying left arm is paralyzed. How deep is the denial? Does she really believe it's not paralyzed? Staring at him, just lifeless. How can she claim it's not paralyzed? So you can probe this further, ask her, but if it's really working, Mrs. You can see touching my nose. How come it's not moving? It's just sitting in front of you. Can't you see it? What if you press them? What happens then? But we're reluctant, physicians are usually reluctant to do this, neurologists, for fear of precipitating what's called a catastrophic reaction, which is a medical euphemism for to start crying, breaks down, starts crying. So understandably, they don't want to do that. But I said one day, I said, why not? Let's try it, see what happens. But you can make her accept the paralysis is useful for rehabilitation. If they don't believe they're paralyzed, they're not going to participate in rehab. First few critical weeks of stroke when rehab is important. So we said, okay, let's try it anyway. And then I said, okay, you said your arm is working fine. What is this? That's my mother's arm, doctor. Is it mother's arm? Yeah, my mother's arm. If you look, my hand is big and hairy, and hers is nice and smooth and my mother's arm. I said, okay, my mother's arm. Where is your mother? I don't want to let go. I want to pursue this with tenacity. Where is your mother? Probably hiding underneath the chair or something. I don't see her in an obvious place, you know. Then I say, okay, touch my nose with your right hand again. Touch my nose with your left hand. You know what she does? Now that's extraordinary, because it means somebody in there knows that the arm is paralyzed. Otherwise she's taking that. It also shows somebody in there knows it's her arm. Why would she do that with her mother's arm? And yet she's, at a conscious level, she's denying that the arm belongs to her. This means that what we call the self, many layers there going on. You can peel off one by one in disease. Then you get this experience of multiple selves trapped in one mind, one body. You see this in the clinic all the time. It gives you the opportunity for studying the many selves that define human existence, right? So then there is, let me give you another example. Okay, so that's very extreme. The patient says, I can touch your nose, I can see it and all that. I said, what if okay, here's another way of challenging the patient. I said, Mrs. D, clap. You can use both hands, right? Clap. You know what she does? I was tempted to ask her the famous philosopher's riddle. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Zen philosopher. I didn't ask her that, but I could have. Now that's unusual. But more commonly, what you see is the following: you say, "Can you touch my nose with your right hand? Can you touch my nose with your left hand?" No. I'm an army officer. I refuse to take orders from physicians. And look at the chart. Indeed, he's an army officer, but to use that as an excuse for not touching my nose is stupid, right? But the person comes up with the euphemisms. Very interesting use of euphemisms. The remarks of this kind, which sort of half make sense, but don't really make sense. To continue that state of denial, it's fascinating. Watching human nature amplified 100-fold. Human nature, we all do this, by the way. We all do denial. I'm going to go through the list of things they do. Rationalization, they do this all the time. You tell them, Mrs. B, can you touch my nose with your right hand? Can you touch my nose with your left hand? What are you doing? Your medical students have been coming and poking me all day. I'm sick of it. I don't want to touch your nose. Again, she fabricates something plausible but not true. Another example is rationalization. I mean, we all do this too. I mean, exam time, the students always say the professor is too strict. My grades are okay. He gave me an exam that's too tough. That's why the grade's low. But in fact, I'm something like, he doesn't realize it's a curve, so it doesn't matter. You know, so but you know, they assert that. So that's common. Rationalization is very common. Denial, but I said outright denial, paralysis, is also common in all of us. Not some rare thing seen in this disease. You know that if you ask people, they're above average or below average in intelligence, ask people in this room later, are you below average or above average in intelligence? 98% of people say they're above average in intelligence. 98%. This is statistically impossible, mathematically impossible. In fact, half of you are below average in intelligence, believe it or not. Not this audience, but. Yeah. Which means that half of mankind is in denial about its stupidity. It's a very common phenomenon, not something rare. So we get to the question of why you do this. That's a very interesting question. So the various manifestations of it. Reaction formation is all a list of Freud. Anna Freud and Sigmund Freud made a list of the tricks the brain uses to stabilize the ego. They call it defending the ego. It's not much of an explanation, but it's a sort of natural history of the mind. Observations on the mind, intriguing observations of the kind that novelists often make, insights that Jane Austen has, but Fitzwilliam Darcy or Bingham, you know. Any good novelist has tremendously deep insights into human nature, more than many of these professional psychiatrists. But they did speak of a thing called reaction formation, which is a good example of which is, what would a good example is gay bashing. In America, it means that you're sort of constantly criticizing gays. And it turns out that if I don't know how they did this experiment, but they took a penile plethysmograph. It measures the amount of blood flow in the penis, in tumescence, and showed this guy pictures, pin-ups, male and female. The guys who most vehemently attacked the homosexuality are the guys who got the biggest erections, looking at these male pin-ups. So it's as though they're sort of asserting the opposite of what they know to be true about themselves but are ashamed of. They should not be, but that's the way society is. So that's called reaction formation. And then I've seen this in my clinic. For example, I asked a patient, is your right arm paralyzed? No, my right arm works fine. Left arm works fine. Can you lift that table with your right arm? Can you lift that table with your right arm? You sure? How much do you think you can lift it? I don't know, about 3 inches? Big heavy table, 3 inches? Okay, fine. What about your left hand? Can you lift it with your left hand? Yeah, 6 inches. Now, if he doesn't know he's paralyzed, why is he asserting the opposite? Why is he exaggerating his ability? Somebody in there knows the truth, that the hand is paralyzed. This is why he's attributing greater strength to that paralyzed arm than to the normal arm. Lovely example of reaction formation in Freudian terms. Repression. Repression is when you, obviously, some information is available to your brain, but you cannot access it. It is quote-unquote repressed, because it would be emotionally traumatic if it were retrieved and brought into consciousness. So there's a lot of literature on this, especially false claims of repression and false claims about memories being dredged up from your past, that you were abused as a child by your mother, so she now owes you a few $1 million. So a therapist comes and hypnotizes you and asks you to confess your mother did abuse you and all that. So there's a big medical legal battle going on about this. Consensus is that many of these cases of repression are bogus. Didn't really happen. But they don't want to throw the baby out of the bathwater. It turns out that it's a perfectly legitimate, genuine phenomenon. I see it in my patients all the time. You take a patient with denial, and you squirt ice cold water in his left ear. I won't go into detail. You get nystagmus. Ice cold water in the left ear of a patient, left side denial, left side paralysis. The guy will suddenly stop denying. He said, my God, my arm is paralyzed. Or even, you don't have to go do ice water, you just wait for a while. After 2 weeks, the patient's back comes out of the denial. Stroke is still damaged, paralyzed. He'll say, my left arm is paralyzed, doctor. So I've seen this patient every day. I come, Mrs. D, can you use your right arm? Yes. Can you use your left arm? Yes. Touch my nose with your right hand. Touch it with your left hand. Are you touching it? Yes, I'm about a centimeter from your nose. So different versions of the same story, but always claiming that the left hand is fine. Then I come in one day and she says, I said, can you touch my nose with your right hand? Sure. Can you touch someone with your left hand? I can't do that. It's paralyzed. No, you should know that. You got you're your doctor. You should know that. 20 days she's been denying it, and 21st day she says she's paralyzed. So my question was the following. This question had never been asked, funnily, in 100 years of research on it. My question was, how long has it been paralyzed? Just the last 24 hours, or last 20 days I've been coming here? But it's been paralyzed all the time. I mean, when you came and tested me, it's always been paralyzed. So she's rewritten the script of her life in the light of new evidence to make things consistent, otherwise it will fall apart. How can you hold simultaneously two contradictory beliefs? You can't. So the only way to account for this is to say, yes, I admit that I was being paralyzed all this time. That's what I told you. So I asked you this question yesterday, and you told me, what? I told you the left arm was paralyzed, doctor. 2 hours later, she's back in denial. I don't know why. There's spontaneous fluctuation. I said, well, what's going on here? Said, my arm is fine, doctor. Works fine. So she was, but I said, why did 2 hours ago you told me it was paralyzed? I didn't say that. She was denying her admission of paralysis. So you see, in one patient, you can see this dynamic, two people there. The paralyzed Mrs. D, who admits she's paralyzed, and Mrs. D was in denial, who says she's not paralyzed, coexisting in one body. You know, why does all this, I'm going to conclude with, why does all this happen, right? It happened, okay, now a couple of other ones. I mean, displacement is where you, or projection, where you attribute your faults to somebody else. You don't have you don't want to admit that you're, but you can't understand, completely deny it because it's staring at you. So for some reason the brain attributes it to another person. Projection, right? I can't think of a good example. What's a good example? Anybody here wants to contribute? Projection, but it's obvious when you see it. It's comical when you see it. Projection, and then there is displacement, obviously, where you sublimate displacement. All that. Okay, I'm going to skip. There's a long list here. Okay, there's also finally intellectualization. Okay. What intellectualization is very interesting. That happens a lot. I've seen it in a lot of my patients. Patient has a brain tumor, grade 4 astrocytoma, something very malignant, glioblastoma. He's been given about 6 months to live, max. He sees me walking into the room and he says, "Oh, doctor, I'm glad you came. They said you were going to come from UCSD to take a look at me." I said, "Yeah. I have this sinus infection. Can you do something about this?" I said, "I'll try and do something about it, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm mainly evaluating neurology." "Oh, there's nothing wrong there. That'll be fine." But I've analyzed it completely. I've looked at the internet and everything. There's such a chance, probability of my recovery, spontaneous recovery. He's done a detailed analysis of this. Done two things. He's done displacement. He's displacing the attention from the main problem. The guy is dying in 6 months of a brain tumor. Why are you worried about sinus infection? Okay, so this is very common among patients, where they'll displace this. Fortunately, it's good for them, right? It keeps them away from ruminating over the main problem. Intellectualization is a version of displacement, where the person transforms an emotionally loaded, charged, threatening eventuality into an intellectual problem. Not a problem pertaining to him and his death and his wellness, but to an abstract intellectual problem. So he goes with hundreds of internet research, spends all his time doing internet research on the particular disorder, which lab did this, which lab did this, not realizing it's an exercise in futility. So trying to blunt the impact of that piece of knowledge by treating it as an abstract intellectual problem rather than an emotional issue that you have to confront sooner or later. Okay, I think towards the end of this talk now, why does this happen? Well, I think what's going on is that the left hemisphere, it involves the interplay of two hemispheres with different cognitive styles. They are mirror images of each other, two hemispheres, controlling opposite sides of the body, but they also have common functions like seeing, left side of the visual world, right side of the visual world. But there's also division of labor. A lot of functions overlap, both hemispheres are capable. There's also specialization. Left hemisphere is specialized for skilled actions, tool use, for example. Also for expressive speech, production of speech, Broca's area. Also for comprehension of language. Wernicke's area is essential. Some comprehension can be achieved with the right hemisphere too, but not to the same extent as the left. So there's a division of labor along for various cognitive capacities. Now, it turns out the left hemisphere is more glib. All the talking I was doing with these patients, when they were talking, telling me I'm fine, is all done by the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere, see, I think one way to describe it, given our time limits here, is the brain is receiving a multitude of sensory inputs, bewildering sensory blitz all the time. It's to deal with information overload. And what it has to do is to weigh different sources of information for their accuracy and reliability and use them for computing whatever your decision you're going to make. So this is what's going on here. So imagine, to give you an analogy, there's a general in a war room. He's enacting war scenes between him and the enemy, his army and the enemy's army. Okay? Enacting a battle with plastic, tanks and plastic. So this is dawn now. So this guy comes in and he gives the general all the information, the light level, the enemy's number of tanks. He's got 100 tanks, we have 150 tanks. Enemy has so and so many infantry, you have so much infantry. All this information, light level is this. You get all this information, and then you say, I make a decision as a general to attack at dawn. Okay? One little guy comes running in, says, General, I looked through a telescope. Guess what, if I look at these pictures? They've got nuclear warheads. What do? You have 2 minutes to decide, 1 minute to decide. You say, shut up. It's true. What is the likelihood that this one guy is right and everybody, other scouts have told you there's nothing there? It's very small. The brain quickly computes this is wrong, and the penalty is too high if he turns out he's wrong. So just shut up. Not only that, don't tell the other troops. Don't tell the others, because if you do, it'll spread mutiny and spread. That's called repression, by way of analogy. Right? Repression. Or you say, lie to them. Tell them the enemy has no nuclear weapon. You can see clearly. That's called a confabulation. I can see my finger touching your nose. And you can produce similar analogies with the other. Now, okay, so the left hemisphere is involved in smoothing behavior, in dealing with discrepancies. When the discrepancies are small, it patches up the discrepancies. It cling to the original status quo, the original model, forge ahead. Don't start reacting to every little discrepancy and change the model. You don't have the time, you don't have the luxury, you'll just die. You don't have the luxury in evolution. You have to do things quickly and fast, statistically often enough to leave babies, as I say always. So that's the left hemisphere strategy. It's delusional. Right? The right hemisphere strategy is slightly different. See, if you left everything in the left hemisphere, there'd be no limit to the delusion. You say, I can play tennis with you with my left hand paralyzed. I can do push-ups, or I can do arm wrestling. Survival would be impossible because you become completely delusional, right? So you need a correction mechanism, and that's in the right hemisphere. It's your devil's advocate when the discrepancy becomes too large, anomaly becomes too large. It rings an alarm bell and says, look, stop deluding yourself. You're bloody paralyzed. You don't have that kind of money to buy a Ferrari. Don't write the check. You'll be bankrupt. The right hemisphere does all this type of both cognitive correction and correction in the sort of sensory and motor domain. I mean, in this patient, when the left hemisphere is damaged, the correction mechanism is intact, and everything seems really normal. They get depressed a lot. The right hemisphere is damaged. Unfortunately, there's no correction mechanism. There's no limit to the delusional path that the patient can wander along, to the point where he says, I can see my finger touching your nose, or make absurd statements which most people regard as absurd, and get away with it. So these two different strategies, styles of processing information in the two hemispheres. There's a push-pull antagonism between the two styles. They balance each other out. So you don't become too delusional, but nor do you start reacting and orienting to every trifling anomaly in the world, which would completely destabilize your behavior, and you'd go crazy. So to avoid that, you get this beautiful mechanism of a push-pull between the two hemispheres. If you damage the right hemisphere, this is removed, the person becomes floridly delusional, as in the case of the patients with anosognosia. Now, but that's not this antagonism between two tendencies, patching up versus completely changing the model, occurs not just between the hemispheres, but even within the hemisphere, front and back. I don't have time to go into, but I'll just leave you with one last example from a clinical point of view. One of the syndromes we're now planning to study is a fascinating syndrome. I can go on all night, whatever, you stop me whenever you want to, okay? Fascinating syndrome called Wernicke's aphasia. Language we think of as something that involves the entire brain, obviously. Rose garden, rose thorns, rose hips, rosy cheeks. And so many connotations, right? So even a mention of one word, rose, evokes activity throughout the brain. But in fact, language is represented in specific brain regions, different aspects of language. Expressive language in the Broca's area, Wernicke's area in the posterior part, in the upper part of the temporal lobes, involved in comprehension of language. If you damage that area, the guy can still talk, grammatical, fluent sentences, accurate sentences, grammatically normal. But he cannot understand anything that's you tell him. His comprehension is gone completely. So semantics, comprehension of language is shot when Wernicke's area is damaged. When he talks, he produces elaborate, smoothly articulated sentences, syntactically normal, grammatically accurate sentences, but completely meaningless. Like a fictitious example would be colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Sentences grammatically accurate, intelligible, but nonsense. Now the funny thing is, one of the things not been studied in these patients is that extraordinary state of denial is the patient permanently hospitalized, institutionalized for life. Because the guy can't understand what anybody's telling him. But he seems euphoric, almost jolly in the hospital. And he sort of denies there's anything wrong with him. I mean, he can't deny it because when he talks, it's just gibberish. You can't understand what he's saying. But think of the number of times he would want a glass of water. He'd say, he'd say something, some nonsensical remark. And the staff would have to understand he requested water. How would she understand that? But there's no frustration. Why is these guys with complete absence of language understanding and complete inability to produce intelligible sentences, which leaves puzzling expressions on people listening to them? The guy comes and talks to you, you have no idea what he's talking about, you just have to shake your head and just listen. Show no sign of frustration and live their lives otherwise completely normally. To me it's extraordinary. I've toyed with the idea of introducing two Wernicke's patients to each other. They're both incomprehensible, and they talk incessantly. They don't terminate speech, they keep on talking, right? It's long sentences, articulated, grammatically accurate, but completely meaningless. If they sit there and keep on yakking away with no frustration, what would happen? What if you had a convention of Wernicke's patients? What would happen then? I was going to say the Republican National Convention part. but okay, so that's just, I'm not going to really do that experiment, but we've done other things. Like for example, you give him a book in Thai. The guy has never seen a Thai book in his life, from La Jolla. He takes the book and he looks at it, and then there's a camera recording this for other purposes. We stepped out to get a coffee, and the camera continued to record him. We went and looked at the film, opening the page and reading it, and then doing that, earmarking, dog earing certain pages, underlining. Complete fantasy. You can't understand a word of any of it. You're reading a Thai book. And you can give him the same book tomorrow, you don't waste any money. Give him the same book tomorrow, and you'll read it with excitement and interest and all that. So, neurology is full of these examples of wonderful syndromes that you can study, even in India. I mean, you don't need fancy equipment. This is what the point I'd like to make in today's lecture is you don't need a lot of money even. I shouldn't say that, but you don't need money, you just need patience to examine and do simple experiments. You can learn a lot. And then confirm your hunches using functional brain imaging if necessary. But don't become a slave to technology, because this is very dangerous. Science should be concept-driven, ideas-driven, not technique-driven. It's like taking a 5-year-old child and giving it a knife. Well, just cut everything it sees, like a piece of cork, a piece of wood, just randomly cutting things. This is what all the brain imaging people do. Majority of them. Some very clever chaps who don't avoid that, like my colleagues, Al Pashler. Majority of them are like 5-year-old kids with knives. And it's fraught with also methodological difficulties. So stick to patients and you can learn a lot from doing simple experiments on patients. Let me give you one more example, if I may. What are we for time? Do you have another 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or should we stop? Okay. So let me tell you about two cases. One case is, I told you about phantom limb patients, face to the hand remapping. One of the things people have observed recently is cells in the brain, which are called mirror neurons. Mirror neuron in the brain will fire when I'm reaching out and grabbing this peanut, putting it in my mouth, another cell will fire. The cell is a motor command neuron that orchestrates the sequence of muscle twitches that allows me to reach out and grab a peanut and put it in my mouth. That entire sequence is programmed in that neuron, output of that neuron. This has been known for 50 years, 75 years. We're in Mount Carson on this. But a certain proportion of these neurons, about 10%, will fire. Rizzolardi showed this in Galassi. Even when the monkey is watching another monkey reach for a peanut. Now immediately people, especially in India, jump to the conclusion it's telepathy and all that. Nothing to do with telepathy. You need the visual input. The visual input of that person reaching for the peanut. The brain transforms the visual signal into an internal model of what the person's intended movement is. Namely, he's going to do the same thing that I would do if I were to reach for a peanut. So he must be intending to reach for the peanut. So you do a virtual reality simulation, that person's mind, that person's brain. And this is all fine and dandy. Now, this is very interesting. So it's a mind-reading neuron in a sense, without any psychic phenomena being involved. Also, you find that the neurons which have touch properties. So if you go to that map there and I touch your index finger, touch neuron will fire, right? In S2, so same, you got a map, you touch me, and the index finger, touch neuron will fire in my brain. Clear. But if you touch him on his index finger, just do that. Give you this permission. Same neuron fires. I'm just watching her touching him. Same bloody neuron fires. It's fired. So what's going on here? Again, it's a mirror neuron. It's taking that input and saying, that person is feeling, so the brain is informing higher centers effectively, that person is feeling the same thing that you would feel if you were touched. So it's an empathy neuron, so to speak. Right? Empathy neuron. You poke her with a needle, no, you're not going to do that, but if you were to do that, then the message will go to my S2 and then to, okay. Anyway, so you're both smiling. If you poke with a needle, for example, the other person shouts, yelp, yeah, ouch, and withdraws his hand. The same neurons fire in your brain, but you do not shout out and withdraw your hand. Because you know, you're watching that patient, you empathize with the patient. The same neuron is firing when you poke him with a needle as when you poke my needle. So why is it when you poke her with a needle, I see her, the neuron is firing, why don't I shout ouch and yell and jump away, go away, and feel the pain? Why not? Same neuron is firing, right? The mirror neuron which fires when I watch her being poked with a needle and a thumb. Same neuron fires when somebody pokes my finger with them. How does the brain know the difference? Where it's coming from signal? Why don't you shout ouch when you poke her? Poke him. That's correct. You read my book, yeah. So because the skin's, the skin, the skin is informing, you've got receptors which are informing the brain higher up. You are not being touched, there's null signal. Just empathize with the person by all means, but don't actually shout ouch and withdraw your hand. It'll be stupid. You're not being hurt. So you get empathy without actual, your mind blending into that person's mind. But if you remove the arm, what happens? That null signal is not coming in. Now if you poke somebody with a needle and you watch, you feel that person's pain in your hand, literally. So all that's separating your mind from your companion's mind is this barrier of skin and receptors. If that's removed, her mind becomes fused with your mind. You start experiencing her quality, her sense of sensations, consciously. That's extraordinary. This is why I call them Gandhi neurons. Dissolving barriers between self and others. There are no barriers. It's all, as Shankara said, For example, you don't identify yourself as shadow. You don't say, shadow does everything you do. You don't say, oh, I got free will over my shadow. That's stupid. Well, it's equally stupid saying you have free will over your hand. Not that fundamentally different. It's a correlation the brain has established from the past experience. And the neuron fires my hand moves, therefore must be causing the movement. So Shankara said this, that your body, it's not any more surprising that your body is an illusion. In fact, the shadow moving in response to your command is an illusion. Now, of course, we have to be careful here because we Indians like to say everything came from here. So, but these are genuine, writings of Adi Shankara. Okay, lastly, so now it turns out that there is a clinically this is useful. Remember the third step, clinical usefulness? Clinically is very useful because the patient has pain in the hand, phantom hand. You can't massage the phantom. But you can watch somebody massaging himself. You feel that massage in your phantom, pain should be relieved. Sure enough, it is relieved. In the patients, 2 or 3 patients we've tested. Has not been done in a clinical trial yet. We're waiting for that. But we feel confident it will work. It'll be yet another technique for treating phantom pain, which has otherwise been considered impossible to treat for the last 100 years. In addition to a mirror treatment, mirror box, which I won't go into, there's another procedure which allows you to do this. We also found there's a congenital version of the same disorder. And actually this was discovered in England by Dr. Blakemore in England. She found that there are some people congenitally, they watch somebody else being poked, they feel the poke in their hand. No amputation, nothing. So it's the congenital equivalent of the disorder we had found. What's going on there? Answer, this veto signal gets messed up in the brain. Something wrong with her somatosensory cortex. Veto signal doesn't arrive or doesn't get integrated properly. So when she watches you being poked, normal person feels the poke in her head. We publish this, you can take a look at it. Even more interesting is if you go and, now here's a good question for medical students. How do I know she's not making it up? Anybody can come and tell me, I feel when you touch, I feel that, doctor. So people are often metaphorical, right? Oh, I feel your sadness. How do you know this patient not being metaphorical? When she says, I actually feel your touch when you touch yourself. Somebody touches you, I feel it. The pain, I feel the pain. How do you know she's not being metaphorical? She literally feels it. 5-minute experiment, not allowed $50,000, 6 months of brain imaging. You're allowed 5 minutes. How do you do it? Very simple. I'm going to keep using you all the time, but you don't mind it. Okay, so you're the patient, right? You'll say you're the patient. Not the patient, the normal volunteer who has this phenomenon of feeling other people's sensations. You did not flinch. You did not do that and do that. He did slightly. Unusually brave guy. But normally if you do that, people do that. Withdrawal and blinking. This is automatic. Right? He's getting habituated. Automatic. Now, the interesting thing is, I did this to my grad student, and she, the subject who claimed that she has that, she had the blink reflex and automatic withdrawal, which she didn't know about. She's not a medical student. Which shows that she's actually feeling this sensation and then withdrawing from it. We can't be 100% sure, but very suggestive evidence, right? Evidence number 2, I take a bucket of dry ice, put it in water. It looks like it's boiling. If touch can be referred, what about temperature? If I put my finger in boiling water, would you feel hot in your finger? Oh, no, don't try it, Dr. Ram. I don't want you to burn your finger. I said, no, just do it briefly. I'll do it very briefly. Okay? I said, ow. I was pretending, of course. I said, oh, yeah, I felt the splashing. I felt the water in my finger, but I did not feel the heat. Why would you make up such an elaborate story? My theory is that mirror neurons exist only for touch, not for temperature. This may be due to phylogeny, the way these things evolve. But now comes the best part. Well, I continued talking to her. She was doing this. Sorry. And then wiping like this. She was wiping off the water. There's no water. It's in her head. She was not trying to deceive me. She was doing behind the desk. I just caught a glimpse of this. To me, that provides more clear evidence than 6 months of brain imaging on this patient. That those 2 observations told me there's a real effect. This should henceforth be called interpersonal galgalesthesia. Because she also, by the way, giggles incessantly if you tickle yourself. Normal person cannot tickle himself. You cannot laugh if you tickle yourself. You just can't. Now, this girl will start laughing incessantly if she watches you tickle. She then feels this rhythmic movement and starts getting it going, and she just starts laughing like crazy. This is all just not any great medical importance, but just interesting to talk about origins of humor and tickling, which I won't go into. Last one, a phenomenon called synesthesia. You all know about this. Numbers that look red and green and blue, right? Ordinary black and white numbers look colored. 1% of the population sees this. We figured it out. It's all published. I'm not going to talk about that. But Galton, Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's first cousin, showed there's another variety of synesthesia where you see calendars, peculiar calendars in the visual world. For example, if I ask you to visualize a calendar in front of your eyes, what does it look like? Can you describe it to me? Just visualize it. A boxes, okay, very good. And then January is where? Point with your finger with January. Okay, and then December? Okay, that's one line. So I'm talking about just one whole year. It does back and forth. Usually it's January, February, March, April, May, June, December. January is usually on the top left, December bottom right. 98% of people. But then the 2% of people who say, oh, I see the calendar in front of me. Well, tell me more. I actually see it. I see the font of the letters. It's typed out in black and white ink. It occupies a box which clearly has outlines. It's about 2 inches wide. It's like a ribbon, U-shaped ribbon. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. This tip of the ribbon is twisted, like a Mobius strip. No wonder people thought they were not crazy, right? And I said, well, another one came in. I said, what's your calendar look like? It looks like a U shape, like this, horizontally lying on the side, U shape. January, February, March, April, December. What about this one? It looks like a cone. These people constitute about 1% of the population. Again, the nagging question is what? What's the nagging question? How do you know they're making it up? How do you know they're not making it up? They literally, when they see the calendar, unlike you and me, you get this vague, indistinct blur. They literally see the lines outlining each month, laid out in front of them in 3D. That is an L shape with the bottom limb of the L going outwards, the upper limb here, and then to show it to you, and the magnitude, the size of the L, everything they'll draw for you. 3D, everything, like a Legos, like Legos. Why the hell should this happen? This is what makes this exciting, cognitive neuroscience exciting. Is this some rubbish or is it something worth pursuing? I said, well, let's see if we can prove that it's real. They're not making it up. My colleagues were doing brain imaging. It was taking them 6 months. They didn't find anything. Where do you look even? I simply said, look, you say you can see the calendar in front of you, right? 10 from March. I want you to do the following. You. Oh, no, let's pick somebody else. What are you? I want you to imagine your calendar in front of you. I want you to recite from a month, I tell you a month, I give you a month. Go backwards, read backwards from that month till you come back to the month. Okay? October. So, September. Keep going. No, you have to say it out loud. Yeah. October. Start. Keep going. That's fine. It's good. Now I'm going to give you a month. I'm going to go forward. April. QED. He did it in much shorter time. You sort of recite it, right? This guy goes equally fast and faster than you, forward or backward, because he's seeing it in front of him. If I give you a printed sheet, you read it, you'll be equally fast both ways. There'll be no difference. You're doing it algorithmically in one case, visualizing it in another case, so you're having an asymmetry for forward and backward. They don't have an asymmetry, much faster. So it's a real phenomenon. And on average, they're about 3 times as fast in reciting the calendar, going backward and forward. So 150-year-old phenomenon discovered by Galton, first time shown to be real in a 5-minute experiment. Okay, now you can go to brain imaging. Okay, now, question is, why is this important? If we think of calendar as something utterly trivial, something you hang on your wall, right? Without your calendar, you're lost. You get up in the morning, first thing is, I'm here in Mylapore. I'm here in this place. I'm supposed to go and get some degree coffee there. Then I'm going to meet my boss. You got this mental events lined up. You have a rough calendar. Monday I'm going to do this, Tuesday I'm going to do Wednesday. So you got this calendar in your brain. It's a vital part of your being a self, a human being, is your calendar, believe it or not. And an initial part is just orientation in space and time. When you get up, you have a sense of where you are, what time it is. Neurologist, first thing you'll do to examine, you look for dementia, or in any neuro routine exam. First thing you'll ask is, where are you? I'm in Devaki Hospital. What time is it? Orientation in space and time is the first thing they'll ask you. To establish that you are at least aware that. Then they say, who are you? And you're supposed to say that. That's a very profound philosophical question. But they mean, what is your name and all that. And then you go from there, right? It's called orientation in space and time. That's taking place in constructing your calendar. So where is the calendar? The question is, where is it? And how do you use it? One of the things we found, first of all, you establish this is real. Where is the calendar in the brain? At what stage in visual processing? The cascade of events that leads to vision is a calendar represented in the brain. So, for example, the visual illusions, like if you put a line, vertical line, and tilted lines, you have tilted lines. Many of you may have seen this, maybe you haven't seen it. Optical illusion, you put tilted lines in the background, you put a vertical line in the middle. What happens to the vertical line? It appears tilted in the opposite direction. Well-known illusion. The number of illusions like that, where you can take an image, see how it interacts with some other image. You get visual illusion. This guy, I asked him to project his calendar, his L shape, on tilted lines, calendar tilted the opposite direction. Like a real visual input. Remember, it's in his brain and mind. There's nothing there on the sheet of paper, it's in the mind. That's interacting with this, with the real lines on the paper and producing a tilt. Not only that, the guy will say, I said, this woman was telling me she sees a ribbon like this, right? January, February, March, April. January, February, it's written there. January, February, March. I said, I'm not quite sure I believe this. It's twisted here. Then I said, okay. Can you imagine yourself walk to the other side of the calendar, or imagine yourself seeing the calendar from the other side. I'm stunned. She said, I don't know, I've never tried that, but I could try. Okay, yeah, I guess I'm doing it now. I'm sort of hovering behind it, and my God, I can't read anywhere. Why, I can't read. It's all mirror reverse. You think about it, that's what it will be. She was surprised by this, but that's exactly what you'd expect from optics. But there's no optical image in the bloody head. The first thing you learn in Psychology 101. There's no images in the brain, but she's acting as though there's an image. Then she said, I said, that's very strange. I said, but but the ones here on the top left, they're not reversed, they're fine. Why? They remember it's twisted like a Mobius strip. So it's consistent. The chance of her making up this is some undergraduate student who knows nothing about psychology or any of this. Her making this up are zero, take it from me. So something is going on in the brain where she's actually constructing quasi-realistic representation. Challenges all the dogma of current neuroscience. That you have equations in the brain. You don't have pictures in the brain. First line of any elementary psychology textbook. You don't have pictures in the brain. The world looks like pictures. No pictures in the brain. The equations. Cells firing. This is what the whole of IIT is devoted to this. So you create this equation, and that's how you encode visual information and you solve it. Partly true. I'm not challenging the basis of all of that. I'm not saying it's wasted. But something else is going on. Something utterly mysterious which we don't understand. As illustrated by these calendar savants. Another example, if he turns his head, for example, very interesting. Calendar remains here, he turns his head, calendar stays here. This guy has a hula hoop as a calendar. 10 for March, okay? Look to the right, calendar sticks to his chest, it doesn't move his head. It's body centered. He said, what did you do in January? And immediately his eyes go towards January. He said, it's a bit fuzzy, it's too far away. Okay. Well, now I can see it. I was in Spain in January. Access to memories is blocked by his eye position, his gaze direction, called embodied cognition. People are very interested in this phenomenon. Okay, so lastly, this is, okay, where is this happening in the brain? Let me show you that and then we're done. Where is this happening in the brain? Okay, let me show you. If you go to the brain structure, there's a structure called the angular gyrus in the left hemisphere. Angular gyrus in the left hemisphere is part of the inferior parietal lobule, IPL. Is there a person or a... Oh, it is. It's good taste, yeah. So what you do is you get IPL in the left hemisphere, inferior parietal lobule, which becomes 7 times bigger in the humans compared to great apes. 7 times bigger in the left hemisphere compared to the right hemisphere. Is that clear? A structure in the human brain which is unique in being 7 times bigger than other equivalent brain structure in primates, lower primates. Something interesting is going on in IPL. What is that? If that's divided into two, it will also split into two, anterior and posterior. Anterior one called angular gyrus, supramarginal gyrus, posterior called angular gyrus. You don't have to remember all that. Front and back, front one is skilled movements and tool use, uniquely human, primarily. Back part is involved in, name a bunch of human traits, things you learn in school. Arithmetic, numbers, arithmetic, reading, writing, all learned in school. Reading, writing, spelling, all done in the angular gyrus, not in the angular gyrus, but angular gyrus is primary focus for that. If that's damaged, you can't spell, you can't read, you can't write. You can't name objects, naming. And we discovered in dyslexic, along with Harini and others, that you cannot, you get sequence messed up. Sequence gets messed up. So if you say, what happened on Monday morning? Did you go to the doctor Monday morning, Monday afternoon? No, I went to the doctor, he had a big white beard, I can't remember the morning or afternoon. Sequence gets messed up, although the memories themselves are intact. So I'm saying there's a sequence detecting mechanism in the left angular gyrus. We haven't proved this, but we have a good hunch there. And that mechanism is then used for arithmetic. Arithmetic, what's important in arithmetic? Sequence, place value. 10 by 10, and by 10 multiplied by 100, multiplied by 1,000. What's called place value, which we discovered, and then we don't get enough credit for it, but now we do, but not to get paranoid about this, but then they became called Arabic numbers. We were transmitted through the Arabs to the Moors, and from the Moors to Fibonacci, Italy, and Fibonacci to rest of Europe. Rest of Europe started using this cipher, this code, treacherous Oriental merchants were using this to trick them, deceive them into making more money. by using strange symbols like cipher, thing that stands for nothing. How the devil can this be? Can't be. So it was excluded from European texts and European mathematics for 4 centuries, 3 centuries. Somebody, Swaminathan should correct me. 3 centuries, 4 centuries. Finally, it was accepted widely, used throughout the world. We now have math, we have arithmetic and everything. Okay. So sequence is mapped onto space. Now, calendars are time mapped onto space. Brain does not evolve things out de novo. Always capitalizes in pre-existing hardware. It's different from AI. Pre-existing hardware is there. If you can use it, retool it and use it. Brain is dozens of such mechanisms. I can tell you, spend all night telling you about dozens of mechanisms which involve taking pre-existing hardware which evolved for some other purpose and using it for a novel purpose. And this is my quote-unquote theory of the brain, approach to the brain. I'm going to argue this happens much more often than people realize. So sequence is mapped onto time, you get a calendar. And there are a band of fibers going from there, from the angular gyrus. You see that band of fibers, PG. Band of fibers, that blue thing. You can dissect it. Goes from the angular gyrus to guess to where? To the hippocampus. It's involved in memory, spatial location. The grid cells and the place cells, one discovered as Nobel Prize about 5 years ago. That's where your brain's GPS is. So this set of structures here, the IPL, the angular gyrus, inferior longitudinal fasciculus, that band of fibers, hippocampal cells involved in locating where I am, GPS, that's what created the human calendar. That pathway is enhanced in these people for some reason, so they can actually literally see it in front of them. They have better imagery, and that's where we're going with this. So anyway, I'll conclude by saying you can do neurology with very simple techniques, simple questions. You can do new work in neurology, especially in India, where there's plenty of material. And you can sometimes help the patient, develop new techniques to help the patient, relieve pain or whatever the patient's suffering from. And so, thank you. Is there time for questions, or should we let it go? I'm happy to do 10 minutes.
Wanted to amputate his own arm. And words that he used to describe it that he felt complete after the start.
Right.
I'm a psychotherapist. And get cases of transsexual.
Similar.
One perfect case of arm, but wants the benefit of the amputation. Only after that he felt good. So I just was wondering whether
it's a very good question. In fact, it's called, all of these disorders called body dysmorphias, as you know. And I think what happens in transsexuals, where they say, I'm a female occupying a male body, and this appendage is offensive, and I don't want to dangling between my legs, get rid of it. And they say that, and then so you see, normal sexuality involves the coherence of several. There's genetic sex, chromosomal sex. There's morphology or anatomical sex. There's your propensity, your sexual orientation to mate. There's sexual identity, who I see myself as in society. And what else? That's mainly it. So all of these are normally in sync. But sometimes some of these are not in sync, and you get the whole spectrum of human sexual behavior and sexual anatomy. And what you're referring to is very possible. We have a body image which is discrepant from your anatomy. And you want to change it, just like the guy who wants arm removed. That's a good question. Yeah. Yes. Empathy quotient is very low, yeah. No, I think it's always neurological, something going on there. You don't understand it, it's behavioral, So I think what's happening there is they're involved in empathy, but they're not the only thing involved in empathy. This frontal interaction with frontal structures, important. But it's possible some sociopaths, you're not talking about sociopaths, but some sociopaths, right. But there are sociopaths who they've been shown to have deficiency in mirror neuron, very preliminary work. But sociopaths, for example, they may not have mirror neurons, so they can't envisage or imagine the agony you're going through. But you can't just be that. You see, I agree. Yeah. But so my answer to your question is yes, mirror neurons may be involved in empathy, and pathological mirror neurons could be involved in diminished empathy in some individuals. All of that, but it's not been tested carefully.
You mentioned about the people who lack comprehension about what you said the converse gibberish. What motivates such people to even engage in such gibberish conversation?
That's the question I've been trying to answer all my life. Every faculty meeting I ask the question.
Diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he's found poetry with such gibberish. He puts it up on stage. Is that,
What does he do, sorry?
he's a schizophrenic,
Yeah.
and he found poetry. He typed through poetry on Facebook.
I hope he was not diagnosed schizophrenic because he writes poetry.
No, I don't know that.
We are heading to that age when that's going to happen, you know. It's all about, it's interesting. I went to my cousin and I went to a party in the Bay Area. Mostly Indians, a lot of Indians and one or two Chinese. And I was introduced as this is Dr. Ramachandran, you know. The guy takes one look at me and he says, software or hardware? I said, I do neuroscience, and he completely ignored me and walked away, you know. So we don't want a world being... It's a good question. Well, the two questions. They identify. One question is, do you see phenomena of this sort in completely blind people? Is one question. Another question is, how do they identify people by the same mechanism by which you use vision? If you see your particular lady always giving you food, your brain associates that particular face with food, and so it's pleasant to meet that person. If you associate a particular voice with food, then instead of face, you associate the voice with food, and you find that voice pleasant. This is Shirley or this is Joe, and Joe is a very nice guy. It doesn't have to be from visual alone. It can be due to auditory as well. So usually in primates, vision dominates, and you tend to use visual information. But if it's not available, then you take any cue that's available. When the throat. If you're blind and the guy has a sore throat, then you get it wrong. I bet. Yeah. Because there's no information available. Can you anomaly like what? Oh, really? Okay. Good question. It's there in my book, but I'll explain it briefly. I mean, what about you have a congenitally missing arm? Do you have a phantom? Many of them don't, but we've seen about one or two of them recently who have a phantom in spite of never having had an arm the entire life. This could be because mirror neurons are constructing, looking at other people and constructing an arm, image of the arm where it should be, or part of this body image is hardwired, already there, specified by genes, so you get this basic arm already there, even though there's no arm there. So you get a representation that is either created through mirror neuron activity, watching other people's arms, normal arms, or there's a scaffolding in your brain already set up by genes that contains that arm. So that's still going to be there even though your arm is removed. That sensation that there's an arm there, your body image still retains that arm. Just survival. Just survival. But it doesn't mean that you can't make it transcendental. I've experienced it personally. Well, I experience it when I listen to Carnatic music. I experience something transcendental, but it's nothing to do with the science I do, right? And I experience it when you have an insight into something, some beautiful idea or insight, or when you look at the moons of Jupiter, or especially when you look at the Aurora Borealis. Send any atheist to see the Aurora Borealis to cure him. No. Macro neuron level, and neural circuits and macro circuits and macro neurons. I don't think the tubules have anything to do. He believes that the microtubules are involved. Problem in science is reductionism is the most powerful tool we have, but you have to pick the appropriate level of reductionism for that problem. If Watson and Crick, with the helix, the correct level for life, for reproduction, for genetic code, the correct level is the molecular level. So they chose if they chose the subatomic level, string theory, to explain genetics, they wouldn't have succeeded. Waste of time. You don't say genes are obviously made of strings, so it must be explained. It won't, right? So there's an appropriate level of description which is useful for that phenomenon you're talking about. Yeah, I like his approach. Yeah, Edelman's approach hasn't really gone very far with it, but yeah.
I'm a branding and marketing consultant.
Okay.
So there is a new area called neuromarketing, which is just coming.
I've heard of it, yeah.
So is there this mirror neuron which is being used in that? Because the advertisement and people who want to market things, they are using different techniques, using some models and a lot of other gimmicks. So I'm just curious to know how much the mirror neurons are being used.
The problem is any new discovery in science, you start using that phrase, it becomes a buzzword. And the phrase then becomes a sort of life of its own. And you think it's very sexy to tell people the mirror neurons are doing this, mirror neurons are doing that. And that's why you have to be careful. So neuromarketing, and you say neuromarketing, mirror neurons are involved in marketing. Then you say mirror neurons are involved in God, neurotheology. So you have to be careful with people just jumping on a phrase. Not always, but often. And using that as a marketing tool. You give it a label or a name, then it becomes more sexy and appealing to people. That you're doing something scientific, not just working on mirror neurons. Right? So you have to be careful of that. Yeah. Okay, I don't know it, but I've seen it, but I haven't read it. Let me go here. I've seen it, but I haven't read it, no. Oh, I see, yes. Yeah. That's very promising, I think, because I think psychedelics were unfairly made illegal for experiment, using them for experiments. And they can open up the transcendental mind. Who knows? Right? Aldous Huxley did that. So it could be that they allow you to reach dimensions of human experience, richness which you can't do with this world that we're in Las Cornas, Maybe there's richer experience. I don't know. Maybe, right? I think research should be encouraged, it should be done. And it's starting to be. No. The use of hallucinogens for enriching your experience is not pop. But it's very early in the game. It's different from saying it's pop, right? Thank you.
I'm sorry, we have to cut off for questions at some point. He's been speaking for nearly 2 hours. So, so I think no words to describe it. More like a concert performance than a lecture, with such flashes of humor, brilliant insights into science, discoveries, overview of the history of the field, its conflicts, a little bit of sadistic pleasure from some of the cheaper experiments that he is able to do, an entire gamut of research, and what a wonderful speaker. A lot of brilliant. Yeah, nallave thatlam. So So absolutely awesome lecture. We are very, very, very fortunate to have such a wonderful speaker. Give such a impromptu, unexpected bonus for us. I think the notebook was circulating out there. If you have missed it, you can sign. Please give us your email. We'll notify you of future lectures. Do you have a moment for them? So we would like. Do you have it? So we'll carry this forward. The Varahmihira regularly scheduled lecture is this coming Saturday at 4 p.m. in the afternoon at Mahalakshmi Hall. If you click our Facebook page, which is Varahmihira Science Forum, there's not too many of them on Facebook. So you can go search for it. You will find the event. You can give us your number, WhatsApp. We'll get together with us. We'll send you the information on it. We try to notify newspapers, like the local newspapers of it. There's coverage. I would like to thank all of you for coming at such short notice. We were literally, most of our group, the organizers were traveling. We were away in Madhya Pradesh. Cell phone signal was, on and off. It was actually very good in some places. The roads were and then, so, and then he called us and offered to give a lecture and find an audience. Fortunately, the hall owner, Mr. R.K. Ramakrishnan, was traveling with us. So, very, very, very fortunately, we thank him a lot. So thank you all. Good night. Hopefully see you next. The next program is not at TVA but at Mahalakshmi Hall. Please check our program schedule for the notification and so on. This video is uploaded to YouTube. So are all the previous lectures. You can go to the Varahmihira Science Forum YouTube channel to look up at it. If I missed thanking anybody, please accept my apologies. Thank you all. Good night.